David Toulis.
And I do thank you for making me the smartest guy with a bow tie. And you, my listener, can be the smartest guy or gal in your category of neckwear. I choose a specifically narrow area because few people wear neckties. But if you tune into the show a few minutes every day, you'll be tops in your straight tie, open collar, or T-shirt neckwear category. David Toulis, and we have things in front of us today that I want to look at and ask you about. Here's a quote from a chief of police in Chatsworth, Georgia. His name is Josh Etheridge. And imagine his comment here as he is explaining how he and his two fellow officers were effectively terrified for their life. The thought behind that would be if the officer had retreated with her being in an elevated position, he could have easily fell down, at which time she, an 87-year-old woman, she could have been progressing on top of him and deadly force could have been used at that point in time. And that was the whole goal, to try to avoid using any type of force, he says. But if we have to use force, use the minimum force. So we have relief, I guess. We have some satisfaction in knowing that the tasing of a senior member of the Chatsworth community, Martha Albishada, who's been in the country with her husband for 22 years, tased for not understanding English. And the taser was used against her to save the officer from having to use his club or his fist to knock her down, knock the knife from her hand with which she had been cutting dandelion leaves for some cooking, putting them into a Walmart bag, according to the report in the Chattanooga Time-Free Press this morning, rightly placed at the top left of page 1. That is where that story belongs. And the TFP has made a good editorial decision to put that story there. But does Martha Albishada deserve to be tased? Do the officers rightly fear for their lives? The quotes about the minimum use of force, the threat of the citizen to the city employee, these are ones that I will ask you, my listener, to evaluate here on the David Toulis Show at 92.7 FM and 95.3 FM HD4. To help us sort through, we have with us the granddaughter of Martha, who speaks only Arabic, who is a Christian from Syria. Martha, tell my listener what happens, and we have also here in the studio Timothy Dunay. Both are Dunays, and young members of the family. Martha, start off by telling my listener about your grandmother and how it is she ended up being tased on Friday by the Chatsworth Police Department.
All right. So her husband was sleeping in the house, and she was preparing the next meal. She was doing salad and some other dishes, and her garden, she usually grows these dandelion leaves, and usually you can find it in the local supermarket, but we haven't found it recently. She didn't have any in her garden, and so I think she wandered off a little too far into the adjacent lot, and she had, like you said, a grocery bag in one hand and then a kitchen knife in the other, and that's when it all happened.
Now, this is on property owned by the Boys and Girls Club of Chatsworth or Murray County.
Yes. We hadn't really known that it belonged to the Boys and Girls Club. There weren't any signs, and there wasn't like a completed fence or anything. It's been a construction site, it seemed like, for the past few months. Some trees have been cut down, and the Boys and Girls Club is up the hill a couple yards away. So, yeah.
All right. So she was there looking for these bits of agricultural fruit for the dinner dressing that evening, on Friday evening. What happened then?
Yeah. And so the Boys and Girls Club called, and if you listen to the 911 call, they are saying, there's a woman here. She seems like she's just cutting vegetation. And overall, they basically said that it's nothing threatening. But I think there's miscommunication from the 911 dispatcher to the police department, because the police heard, or I assume heard, lady with knife near the Boys and Girls Club.
Right, which Chief Etheridge in an interview with TV9 said, well, when we heard that, we sort of leaped, our hearts racing, effectively.
Yes, and I mean, they came with guns drawn, and I think there's obviously a miscommunication and language barrier there.
All right. Well, what happened? Now, did any of your family members witness the attack on your grandmother, or are all these just based on reports here?
No, these are based on reports. But me and my mother did arrive as she was handcuffed. The handcuffs were behind her back, and they were trying to put her in the car. We were just going, to check up and give them some company that day, and we came upon that, and I ran down, told the officers what was going on, that this is my grandmother. She doesn't speak any English. There's obviously a miscommunication going on, and what can we do? At this point, I did not know that she was tased, and they didn't tell me, and I didn't know until I was at the jail.
Was she walking, or were they carrying her?
She was just standing by the police SUV, and they were telling me to tell her to get in the car. After I tried talking to her 4 or 5 times, and they just told me, stay back. And then they finally...
You were speaking to her in Arabic?
Yes. I was trying to, tell her everything's okay. We're going to get this solved. And she was, telling us, like, what's going on? Can you help me?
Were the officers glad to see you, since you did speak the language of this foreigner?
I mean, I thought they would, be a little bit more communicative, because I just came down there and I said, I'm so sorry, like, what's going on? And they just said, stay back. And then...
As if somehow there might be an explosion, or someone's life might be in jeopardy
exactly,
if you stepped too close to either them or your
everything
grandmother.
Seemed calm, and I said, what's going on? What did she do? And
did they explain to you why she was under arrest?
Yeah, they said she had a knife and was waving it at us. And I said, I'm sorry, she was, cutting something. Everything happened so quickly, so I don't want to quote anything directly, but...
All right, so she's under arrest. And Timothy, tell my listener here on the David Hewlett Show, Timothy Dunay, you are also, like Martha, a recent graduate. Martha is 22. We're just hearing from her. These are the Dunay family from Chatsworth. Their aged grandmother, Martha Al-Bishara, tased in her chest, and apparently another taser dart in her stomach, in a story that has been carried in news outlets across the country. Timothy, tell my listener further in the story, please.
Okay. So, the whole thing, we saw body cam footage. Our family's seen the body cam footage and has requested that. So we're able to corroborate what the police report says. And that's that she was being really, really gentle with them. And I think the key point here is that they were trying to establish some sort of line of communication with her before she was tased, and she was trying to establish with them, so she tried multiple ways. She tried saying the name of my father, who is the their emergency contact.
So she was saying a name to them, but they didn't know that was a name.
They didn't know that was the name. They were like 10 feet away. You know what I mean? There was a considerable distance. At one point, it was 20 yards. At one point, they said it was like 10 feet or something like that. And so she was holding that kitchen knife, and she was trying to, all the police reports say, oh, she refused to drop. It wasn't a refusal. She was trying to establish communication with them. She bent down and tried to pick another dandelion to show them what she was doing. During that time, they were showing her drop the knife by dropping their own knives. But she wasn't understanding that, and she wasn't paying attention to that. There was no refusal here at all. There was just no communication, period.
Well, what happened then? Why? Let's ask a little bit about the officer's fear. We heard the quote from the chief. And this is just policy. By policy, we are a fearful tribe of people, and our lives are constantly in danger. And so we're going to use what we would call minimum force. Mm-hmm. Why? I mean, well, let's not theorize just yet. But let's ask, what is your grandmother being charged with? She's being accused under the criminal statutes of the state of Georgia on two counts. What are they?
They're criminal trespassing and obstruction of justice.
Okay, let's take the first one first. How does that fly?
How does criminal trespassing fly? Not well, because in one case, we had told her, Grandma, don't wander off, don't go like this. But they need their exercise, so they walk up and down sometimes.
They are adults.
Yeah, they are adults. They've lived a lot more years than you and I have, and are a lot wiser. So they wander off sometimes and that sort of thing. But they're as far as criminal trespassing,
it is a free country.
It is a free country.
It is a free state of Georgia.
They were walking an area that didn't seem to be marked and that didn't seem to be owned by anybody. There was a construction project going on, but it could have very well belonged to the city because they work on the sewers there all the time. And then she wandered onto this little lot, and she was yelled at by some teenagers, which happens to her all the time in a language she doesn't understand.
Ones who perhaps called 911.
That's correct. Possibly. Yeah. And so she didn't understand what they were saying, and all of a sudden, all she knows is there are cops with guns drawn pointed at her, and she doesn't know that she's been trespassing at all. I mean, if they wanted to have a trespassing, they ought to have a completed fence with a sign. She didn't jump no fence.
Right. Or she, the Boys and Girls Club or the DA's evidence has to be that, well, we have proof that she had been told directly or by mail or by some other way we can verify in court that you cannot be on this property, do not come on this property.
That's correct.
And so to be criminal trespass has to have that it has to be based on the fact that or you're intending to be there when you've been told not to be there.
Sure.
Right? That's implied in that statute.
Mm-hmm.
So you're suggesting that, well, there was never a clear communication by the owner of the property to the defendant or the accused,
right,
in this case.
That's correct.
All right. So she's also charged under the obstruction statute. What is that about?
So the obstruction of justice that's not something that I have a lot of understanding about, but she was trying to keep them from
well, it says,
figuring out what.
Okay, yeah, it's 161024, obstructing or hindering law enforcement officers, and this statute is simply unconstitutional. Okay, and I don't know why it's still on the books. It has not been overturned for vagueness, and it's important for the listener to consider this. Why do laws have to be clear, and what's wrong? Think about it. Here on the David Hula Show, if it's vague, what happens is there's no notice. A vague law can't stand because it doesn't give notice as to what the law is. Notice has to be clear. A law has to be exact and particular so that you will know, you will know what to do or what not to do. You will have a clear sense of direction on what is forbidden or what is compulsory. And that's why statutes are overturned as vague, because you can't tell for sure what constitutes the act that is being charged against. Mm-hmm. And so just the listener, we've heard about Constance Giles in the next county. You're in Murray County. Martha Donay and Timothy Donay, and in the Constance Giles case in Whitfield County, the same issue on the statute that says you violate this code when you knowingly or willingly obstruct or hinder. Okay, knowingly or willingly, 2.1, obstruct or hinder any law enforcement officer in the lawful discharge of his official duties, and that's the misdemeanor version. The felony version is if you use violence to do that. So the question is, where's the lawful discharge of duty, and then knowingly and willingly. So you see, did this older woman know and willfully hinder or obstruct? I mean, they came to the lot addressing her, right?
Absolutely.
She wasn't jumping in their way on their route to do something else. Mm-hmm. Some other law enforcement. She was there, and they came to her, and now not understanding them. She is charged. She's shot. First of all, she's given a cattle prod, mm-hmm. and for ostensibly knowingly and willingly obstructing or hindering. What did she hinder them from doing? What were they trying to do that she hindered them from doing? That's the question that we have to ask the listener. And the number is 800-8949. That's 800-8949. If you have a question for either Martha Donay, the granddaughter of the police victim here in Chatsworth, and also Timothy, her grandson, both students, former students at Lee University in Cleveland. So, what else do we need to know in the way of fact? Was she shot twice, or were there two? How did the prongs work, Martha? Were there two entry points on your grandmother's body on her front?
Yeah, there were two injury points. I don't know anything beyond that, but I do know there's still some scars, and it did bleed through to her undershirt. But I would like to point out, going back to the obstructing or hindering part, when I had arrived on scene, her hands were in handcuffs behind her back, and they told me tell her to get in the car after a few times. And I didn't realize at the moment that, she uses her hands to push up anywhere, walking upstairs or anything, sitting on the couch, getting up from the couch. And they were trying to get her into a police SUV without any hands, and hands tied behind her back. So maybe they thought she was resisting to get in the car, but I think that she just was not able to get in the car. And it didn't come across my mind at the moment too that they needed to release it and maybe put it in the front or help her get in.
And why do these courageous officers, Josh Etheridge, the chief, and his two cohorts in the department, why do they think that they have to handcuff an old woman to begin with? Why do they really think that she's going to grab one of their Glocks, unholster Glock, aim it at them and shoot? Do they really think that kind of threat would emanate from an old Syrian Christian member of the local community who's as harmless as could be? Do they really think that she has to be treated that way? Were there any scars or abrasions on her wrists?
Absolutely.
Martha?
Yeah, there were bruises. I mean, I think Tim could talk about it more. He checked her up medically at the jail.
So there was some scarring. So the tasers were 2 prongs. It releases 2 prongs to complete a circuit and shock the person they're trying to tase. So they're like reverse fish hooks. They go in, and when you pull them out, which they did, it leaves a big gash. Because the fish hook has to be pulled out. Imagine pulling it out of a fish's mouth or something like that. And so there was that, and there was bleeding from that. It was obvious on her shirt here, on her above her breast, and then underneath her breast as well. You could see where the prongs went in. But then, she was struggling. She can't hardly get her hands behind her back anyway. She's got shoulder problems and back and hip and knee problems anyway. So they had her handcuffed behind her back, and she had been struggling in those handcuffs to balance herself and to get into the car. And there was bruising all over her wrist.
Did they ask you, Martha, to ask your grandmother about how she was feeling, or was she feeling injured? Did they ask you to give medical attention to her, or did they call the ambulance for this senior citizen?
No, nothing. No ambulance EMT was called. And like I said earlier, I did not know that they had tased her at that moment. And so to me, I was just making sure mentally that she was okay, that she knew that everything will be okay and that we'll take care of it. I wasn't thinking, oh my gosh, I need to, see if she's okay. Like if her heart's okay, if we need to call an ambulance. So I think that was one of the things that most upset me.
Okay, well, my question is, did the cops, did Josh Etheridge's fellow city employees, who just fired this electric stun gun on a harmless woman, did they ask you to ask her about her health? In other words, can you make sure that she's not in any pain in her back? I mean, she did fall down. When old people fall down, they break hips. My mother has had a broken hip in her early 90s. So when you're in your late 80s and early 90s, that's when hips break. That's when bones break. That's when you have broken bones that can't be repaired. My mother, in her very late 80s, had a broken arm, and she could not have her surgery did not heal it. So the question is, again, did they ask you to ask her about her health? Yes or no?
No, not to my memory.
Okay, well, let me ask you, Timothy, why are cops like this? Why are they so domineering, so powerful, so potent? I mean, these men are terrifically potent, and they seem unwilling to take the slightest risk. As we heard from the quote from the chief, the fact that they had to tase her because she was standing a little bit higher ground than the officer, and the officer, if he had not acted, he could have fallen back and stepped back and fallen backwards. That's why he didn't retreat, because he might have fallen backwards, and then she would have been in a superior position to run at him with her knife.
Right.
When I read that quote, which is, by the way, at Nuganomics.com, our sponsor, I just have I'm cringing or laughing. I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah,
Timothy. So why? Tell me a little bit more about these Americans and their police. What are these police all about? Why are they there? Explain to my listener the necessity of police.
Well, my cousin is a police officer, and so we'd always loved police. My mom said after this, she was like, she couldn't believe a policeman had ever been wrong, because it's a small town. It's like Mayberry over there on the Andy Griffith Show. We never expect the police have never done us or done us anything wrong. And to be fair, that's a difficult position. I concede that it's a difficult position to be in as a police officer, because there is so much.
But why no patience? Why not just say, ma'am, could we just come up to her, give her the arm? Here, you're on kind of a steep, high area. Take my arm. Let's just walk down back to your house. Why not just say, could we walk with you?
Yeah.
Why not that?
She would have understood that.
Lethal danger?
She would have understood that language. If they had walked to her with their hand outstretched, and she would have handed them the knife. You know what I mean? She didn't understand what was going on. There was no sense of humanity there. You know what I mean? There wasn't any sense that she's another human being, and she has fears and emotions just like them, you know?
Well, that's a main point of reform, Timothy Dunay, and that is the use of time, space, and cover to avoid having to kill, maim, injure, knock down people who either don't deserve death, a death sentence, a summary death sentence, or who don't deserve to be physically injured by the enforcer of the law and ostensibly equity. Mm-hmm. So the patience was not in view here, cover was not in view, and time was not in view, and these officers had to resolve this right now. So listen, Martha Dunay and Timothy Dunay, thank you for joining me on the show today. Thank you. We've been hearing from the grandchildren of Martha. I'll give a shout out to Cat Ward, who was tased. We'll read the story today at movienomics.com. That's movienomics.com. And we'll talk more about this very evil and vague statute and the whole doctrine of notice in just a minute. But first, I've got some terrific and wonderful sponsors here. Nigger Radio.
3, 2, 1. Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news now.
Stephen Foster, the Democratic congressional candidate, is going to miss Election Day. He'll be in jail. TFP reports he's been sentenced to 6 months in jail and 6 months probation. In Dalton, dash cam video revealed his drunken tirade against America, which he later said he regrets. The deadly shooting on Mowbray Mountain was ruled a homicide last night. Reports say Roger Kelly was murdered on Hotwater Road in Saudi Daisy. Anyone with information regarding the shooting is asked to contact the Sheriff's Office Criminal Investigations Division. And the parking lot on King Street, which is going to be renovated soon, will be available for